Welcome to Uncorking the Issues, the podcast where we pour clarity into Temecula Valley politics. I'm your host, Grapevine. This podcast discusses political and civic issues. The views expressed are solely those of the host and guests and do not represent any political party, campaign, school district, or government entity. Today's episode is titled California's 48th Congressional District Changes on the Ballot. This race is crowded. The stakes are real. And voters across the 48th are asking a dangerous question for any long-serving incumbent. Why does life feel harder while representation feels exactly the same? Rent is up, gas is up, groceries are up. Healthcare costs more even with insurance. And yet politically, this district feels stuck on repeat. So today we're opening the bottle, not to endorse, not to attack, but to examine what's actually on the table. Let's uncork it. Let's start with the incumbent, Darrell Issa. Not because he's new, because he's been here so long, he feels historical. At this point, Darrell Issa isn't just an incumbent, he's a recurring character. Issa's governing philosophy hasn't changed much over the years. If government would just step out of the way, the market would fix everything. Issa supported repealing the Affordable Care Act, arguing that less government would lead to better outcomes, even as medical debt remains one of the leading causes of bankruptcy for American families. He backed efforts to defund Planned Parenthood while insisting he supports freedom, just not the kind that includes reproductive choice. Issa often talks about fiscal responsibility. In practice, that has meant cutting assistance programs, while defense spending and corporate tax advantages remain largely untouched. When housing costs explode, Issa offers patience. When wages fall behind inflation, Issa offers experience. When people struggle, Issa offers familiarity. To be fair, he did vote for marriage equality. That matters, but supporting equality after the political risk has passed isn't courage, it's timing. Issa's pitch is stability. And he's right. If he wins again, nothing would fundamentally change. And that's the question voters are really asking. If this approach was going to work, wouldn't it have worked by now? This race feels different because the district is different. Families are younger, costs are higher, political identities are less rigid. This is a district where people work hard, commute far, and still feel behind. That pressure is why this race is crowded. Now let's talk about the Democratic field. Brandon Riker is running for Congress in California's 48th district with a message rooted in one simple reality. Living here has become too expensive for too many people. Housing costs are rising faster than wages. Healthcare premiums and deductibles are eating into paychecks. Gas and groceries cost more every month, and retirement feels further away instead of closer. Riker's campaign starts with affordability because that is what families experience every single day. Riker is a Democrat with a background in business and economics. He approaches policy less like a talking point and more like a math problem. If the numbers do not work for working families, then the system is failing them. His core message is that the economy should work for people who earn a living here, not just for people who already own assets. On healthcare, Riker supports expanding access and lowering costs. He opposes efforts to cut or privatize Social Security and Medicare. He argues that seniors and working families should not have to choose between medical care and financial stability. On the economy, Riker emphasizes protecting retirement security, supporting veterans, and strengthening the middle class. He frequently talks about wages lagging behind costs and the need for policies that reflect the real price of living in the district. Riker also highlights his opposition to corporate influence in politics. His campaign emphasizes grassroots fundraising and rejects corporate PAC money, positioning him as accountable to voters rather than special interests. A defining feature of Riker's campaign is accessibility. He is focused heavily on community meetings, town halls, and listening sessions. Rather than leading with ideology, he leads with questions about what residents are struggling with right now. Where Riker is strongest is clarity of focus. Affordability is not one issue among many for his campaign. It is the through line. Where voters are still seeking more detail is in policy depth beyond cost of living. Issues like climate change, immigration reform, and reproductive rights are areas where constituents are watching closely for more specific plans. Still, Riker's appeal lies in relevance. He is speaking directly to the pressure people feel when they do everything right and still fall behind. In a district where costs keep rising but representation has stayed the same, Brandon Riker is making the case that economic reality should matter more than political longevity. Amar Campanajjar is running for Congress in California's 48th District as the most ideologically clear candidate in the race. He is not new to voters. He has run before, and those campaigns shaped how he shows up this time. Campanajjar is a Democrat with a background in national security, veterans advocacy, and government oversight. He previously worked in the Department of Defense and later on Capitol Hill, focusing on veterans issues and accountability. His campaign is built around the idea that incremental change is no longer enough for working families. On healthcare, Campanajjar supports universal healthcare principles. He argues that access to care should not depend on employment, income, or geography. Medical debt, in his view, is not a personal failure. It is a policy failure. On reproductive rights, Campanajjar is explicit. He supports full reproductive freedom and federal protections for abortion access. He frames the issue as both personal liberty and healthcare access, not a political bargaining chip. On the economy, Campanajjar emphasizes worker protections, fair wages, and the right to organize. He argues that productivity has risen while compensation has not, and that Congress has consistently favored corporations over labor. A central theme of his campaign is anti-corruption. Campanajjar supports banning members of Congress from trading individual stocks. He calls for tougher ethics rules and reduced influence of corporate money in elections. He argues that many policy failures trace back to who politicians are financially accountable to. Veteran services are a cornerstone of his platform. He supports expanded mental health services, streamlined access to benefits, and stronger oversight of the Department of Veterans Affairs. He frequently ties veterans' care to broader healthcare reform, arguing that no veteran should have to fight bureaucracy after serving the country. Campanajjar's tone is direct and unapologetic. He does not soften positions to appear more electable. He frames compromise as acceptable only when it produces real outcomes, not when it delays action. This approach appeals to voters who are frustrated with political caution and symbolic gestures. For them, clarity is more valuable than comfort. At the same time, Campanajjar's style can be polarizing. His bluntness resonates with some voters and alienates others who prefer incremental or consensus-driven leadership. Still, his supporters see him as a candidate who names problems plainly and proposes solutions without hedging. In a crowded field, Amar Campanajjar offers something distinct. Not moderation, not familiarity, but definition. His campaign challenges voters to decide whether they want gradual adjustment or structural change. That question is central to his run for Congress in California's 48th District. Marnie von Wilpert is running for Congress in California's 48th District with a profile built on governing experience rather than political theory. She is a Democrat and a current city council member, and her campaign emphasizes the idea that federal leadership should be grounded in real-world problem-solving. Von Wilpert's background is rooted in local governance. As a city council member, she has dealt directly with housing shortages, infrastructure maintenance, public safety decisions, climate risk, and budget constraints. Her campaign argues that these experiences matter because federal policy ultimately lands at the local level. On housing, von Wilpert prioritizes increasing supply and affordability. She supports policies that encourage the construction of affordable and workforce housing, streamline permitting, and reduce barriers that prevent cities from building enough homes. She frames housing as both an economic and quality of life issue. On reproductive rights, von Wilpert is explicit and consistent. She supports full reproductive freedom and federal protections for abortion access. She treats reproductive health care as a fundamental right rather than a political bargaining tool. LGBTQ equality is a central part of her platform. Von Wilpert supports federal protections against discrimination, marriage equality, and policies that ensure LGBTQ individuals can access health care, housing, and employment without fear of exclusion. On gun violence prevention, she supports common-sense measures such as universal background checks, red flag laws, and restrictions designed to reduce mass shootings while respecting lawful ownership. Her approach reflects the balance she has navigated in local government between public safety and civil liberties. Climate action is another core issue. Von Wilpert supports transitioning to clean energy, investing in climate resilience, and addressing wildfire and extreme heat risks that directly affect Southern California communities. She frames climate policy as both environmental protection and economic opportunity. Worker protections and economic fairness are also key priorities. She supports fair wages, safe working conditions, and policies that help families keep pace with the cost of living. Her campaign emphasizes that economic growth should benefit workers, not just corporations. A defining feature of Von Wilpert's campaign is her focus on implementation. She talks less about ideological purity and more about how policies are executed, funded, and enforced. Her message is that values only matter if government can deliver results. In contrast to long-serving incumbents, Von Wilpert presents herself as prepared rather than entrenched. Her campaign argues that experience does not have to mean stagnation, and that new leadership can still be operationally ready on day one. For voters who value competence, preparedness, and progressive priorities backed by governing experience, Marnie Von Wilpert offers a model of leadership focused on execution. Her campaign asks voters to consider not just what policies they support, but who is prepared to make them work. That question defines Marnie Von Wilpert's run for Congress in California's 48th District. This race includes several other Democratic candidates. Whitney Shanahan centers her campaign on protecting abortion access, healthcare affordability, family safety, and gun violence prevention. Abel Chavez, a school board leader, emphasizes education funding, workforce development, and community investment. Corinna Contreras, a local council member, focuses on housing affordability and small business support. Mark Iannarino, a Navy veteran, highlights veteran services, national security, and economic stability for families. Curtis Morrison, an immigration attorney, advocates comprehensive immigration reform, due process, and humane treatment of immigrant communities. Nicholas Davis, Brian Nash, and Ferguson Porter are lower visibility candidates broadly aligned with Democratic priorities on healthcare, climate, and economic equity. Mike Busey, running as an independent, emphasizes government reform, fiscal responsibility, and political independence. This race is crowded for a reason. Voters aren't asking for perfection, they're asking for relevance. They want affordability, accountability, and representation that reflects the reality of life here now, not 20 years ago. The bottle is open, the options are many, and for the first time in a long time, change isn't theoretical. It's on the ballot. I'm Grapevine. And this has been Uncorking the Issues, pouring clarity into Temecula Valley politics. Until next time, question the label, check the source, and never drink the spin.